In the quiet of their home, with the familiar scent of dinner in the air and an unspoken tension permeating the air between them, Brandon sat with difficult words and unresolved emotions echoing in his mind as he contemplated how he and his wife, Sally, had gotten to this point. Over 20 years of marriage, they had 2 wonderful college-aged children and a charming old house, a gift from Sally's grandmother that was the backbone of their life together. Their waterfront home in Hatteras, North Carolina, holds a special place in his heart, and he is reluctant to remodel it, wanting to preserve the nostalgic memories of his childhood spent there. Meanwhile, Sally Baker, who has a thriving career as a senior account executive at Rivera & Son, has spent the last 20 years honing her skills. Their life seemed idyllic, with a perfect home, near-perfect children, a successful career and a happy marriage. He replied, hoping she hadn't noticed the 32 marks on the paper in front of him in the last 2 days. He had said to his wife, "I get it 32 times it was time to end this argument, so we finally agreed." Sally said, "I'm going to experience this outside of our marriage for once," and she paused as she saw Brendan shake his head. Brendan met Sally's gaze and said firmly, "I would never cheat on you, and I will never agree to you cheating on me." "I have never cheated on you," Sally protested. Brandon Sally insisted, "Yes, at least in my opinion, and if you're honest with me, you've had several lunches with him. He's met you several times on your girls' nights and turned those nights into de facto dates, and you've had a lot of text message conversations with him, especially on the weekends. His intentions were obvious. You had a bold new dress hidden in the back of your closet, a Victoria's Secret bag full of new lingerie, which I'm guessing you only showed him because you hid that from me, and your intentions were obvious." Brandon paused and waited for a reply, but there was none. "I want you to come with me. We can use this weekend to work things out between us and see if we can save our marriage." "I need you to look at me," Brandon said slowly to Sally, and she looked up. "You can go ahead with your plans, you don't need my permission, but the moment I drive out of our driveway on Saturday morning, without you, our marriage is over." Sally looked at Brandon dumbfounded. How did he know about their weekend plans? "I have acquaintances where you work, you have allies there who are worried about you, and as for Steven Martinez, he doesn't have any real friends at all." Sally took a moment to think about what Brandon had said, then she tried to take the offensive. "I've been your faithful wife and companion for 22 years, but Brandon interrupted her. "No, you've been a faithful companion for 21 years and 10 months now. You've been dating Steven Martin behind my back for 10 months, since the first time you had lunch with him." "I never cheated on you," Brandon said. Sally pleaded. "You did more than exchange kisses with him," Brandon began, and Sally stood up this time and interrupted him. "How many times have you been with him mentally when we were alone?" Sally felt her elaborate plan break down in front of her as she tried to regain control of the conversation as Brandon said, "Our marriage is strong and I cherish our relationship and your love." Sally sighed and lowered her eyes before meeting Brandon's eyes again. Brandon's response swift, "I understand, but you've been lying and sneaking around for months. You've gone to girls' nights and actually dated him. You've been intimate with him over lunch, holding hands, letting him touch you the way only I should, and worst of all, you've taken him into our bedroom and used thoughts of him to worst of all. You brought him into our bedroom and replaced me with thoughts of him, and you let him interrupt our time with countless messages, not to mention the nature of your conversation." "Not to mention the nature of your conversation, Sally. I know everything about everything. It doesn't matter how I gain that knowledge. What matters is that you understand what I'm telling you. Do you understand?" Brandon's tone was firm. Sally's eyes met his, but there was confusion in them. Sally lay motionless on the couch. After a few minutes she picked up her cell phone and dialed Monica's number. Brandon knew all about Steven and our plans for the weekend, Sally confessed. Monica answered the phone and immediately expressed her concern. "That doesn't sound good. Are you going to cancel your plans?" Sally's voice was barely audible. "I don't know how I can cancel my plans. I've promised Steven and he's put a lot into this weekend," Monica urged her, reminding her of her commitment to Brandon. Monica countered. "I didn't cheat on Brandon," Sally reiterated, her voice trembling. "Yes you did," Monica retorted. "When I told you what Arthur and I did, I made sure you understood that it was with his consent. We chose someone we would never see again. Reconsider, forget the plan, don't meet with Steven again, apologize to Brandon." Sally replied softly, "But I need this chance to experience another man again. Steven is a good man, The women at the company say he's a good man. A good man wouldn't sleep with a married woman, Monica insisted. Monica wanted to yell, "Can't you see that? That's worse. I met Steven at our girls' night out. He's nice, but he's nowhere near as nice as Brandon. Don't you see that?" "I do," Sally whispered. Monica urged, "Please take your time with this decision. This is going to affect your life and the lives of the people you care about for years to come." Sally sighed in a low voice. "I thought you'd get it. I thought you'd understand why I'm doing this. It's not because I don't. It's not because Brandon doesn't understand. It's not because your children, parents or friends will not understand. It's because you don't understand. I begged you not to do it," Sally replied firmly. "Brandon knows everything I've done and he didn't stop me." I said I regretted telling her what we'd been through. Arthur sighed. "Didn't we agree to keep it a secret?" Monica turns to Arthur. "I need to talk to someone about the problems we are facing." I didn't expect her to have ideas. Arthur hugs Monica and replies, "I understand and I'm not sorry. I have to admit Brandon and I discussed our problems. Did he suggest kicking me to the curb or branding me with a capital A on my forehead?" Arthur reassured her that you know Brandon better. "He asked me a series of questions that made me reflect on our relationship. After answering them, he told me something vital, that the two of you came to this decision together, that it may have been a big mistake but that only the two of you can make it right, and that as long as we stay together and work on improve our relationship and everything will be okay. He made me realize that we are in this together and we are trying to make up for everything, and that he is probably the reason we are still married." Monica began to cry softly and mumbled, "He could be the reason we're still married and we could be the reason he's divorced." Arthur held her close and shook his head. "Don't blame yourself if they split up. Brandon's right. If they don't work it out together, they won't have a chance." Sally quietly climbed into bed and noticed that Brandon was still awake. He turned away from her and ignored her. Both of them moved to opposite sides of the bed. Despite being only 2 feet apart, the distance was immeasurable, as if they were miles apart. After Sally left for work, Brandon rested for a moment, checking the list in his hand. He decided to stay away from work today and Monday. Brandon walked through every room in the house, taking pictures of the items in the rooms and making notes. He planned to empty the man cave or the rooms that Sally didn't like. In any case, he transferred their wedding and family photos from the cloud to a YouTube, leaving their wedding album on the coffee table, and though the apartment he'd seen was nice, he still couldn't bear to open it. Brandon drove to see Lauren Taylor, an attorney who came highly recommended by Kim, and she offered a straightforward settlement. Sally would get the house and her 401 retirement plan, while Brandon would keep the beach house and his retirement plan. They would pay for the car and credit cards. Part of their investment account would be set aside for college tuition, and each child would get 10. Brandon nodded and Lauren Taylor suggested a ceremony for Sally on Wednesday morning, and Brandon nodded again, stood up and shook her hand before leaving the office. Lauren Taylor realized that he had spoken very little since her client had entrusted her with the divorce. All communication had been via email, and she sensed his sadness and resignation. Brandon went to the bank and opened a new checking account, transferred half of the funds from the old account to the new one, and then sent a direct deposit change form to the company's Human Resources Department, after which he planned to update his direct payment account to reflect the new bank account. Brandon told him that his attorney, Lauren Taylor, would freeze the accounts the day after Sally was served. Brandon could hardly stand the looks of sympathy and concern that flowed from his longtime advisors, realizing that they were only the first of many acquaintances who would react the same way when they heard the news. Sally avoided Steven Martinez as much as possible at work, and at lunch they met at the Vian Cafe, a small restaurant he liked to call their home. Sally was quiet and refused to hold his hand, and even though Brandon knew their every move, she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been brainwashed all day. Steven Martinez was completely oblivious to Sally's moods. "I'm really looking forward to this weekend," he said. "The hotel's check-in time is 3:00 p.m. Do you think we could meet a little earlier than planned? Maybe have some fun in the room and then go out for dinner?" "I'm not sure," Sally replied quietly. Back in her office, Sally tried to concentrate on her work, but her attention kept wandering. She realized that at least one, and possibly several, of her coworkers were tipping Brandon off, and after a few hours of unproductive work, she decided to call it a day and leave the office. P.M. He decided to go to Vivian's cafe and grab a bite to eat. When he sat down, Vivian, the owner, came out and gave him a warm hug. Brandon returned the hug and asked him how DK was doing. He was happy, Jacob was the perfect training partner for him this winter. Your son made the difference, and Jacob was looking forward to having his roommate on the baseball team. Brandon replied with disappointment in his tone, but don't lose hope. She must be very special for the two of you to have been married for so long. She'll realize the error of her ways, hopefully sooner rather than later. Vivian said soothingly, a Maryland-style crab cake with broccoli for you then. Brandon's face lit up for a moment. That sounded perfect that day. Maybe even switch up the beer and surprise me with your pale ale. She was going to make one of Brandon's favorite dinners and then try to talk to him again. It would be crucial for him to agree to her offer or at least accept her decision after the crab cakes were baked. She changed into a nice dress with the intention of going to meet Monica and her friend Layla for drinks and to have a last-minute discussion about Saturday's upcoming event. She carefully put the costume and the Victoria's Secret bag into the trunk of the car. She didn't want to embarrass herself or Brandon by taking them out in front of him. Taking off her jacket and tie, "Have a seat, dinner will be ready in a minute." She smiled as she looked at the Maryland-style crab cakes and steamed broccoli, and Brandon realized that he would have preferred to dine at Café Vivian, despite the fact that his favorite meal was already on the table. In this moment, the two ate in silence as Sally tried once again to explain why she needed Brandon. "I love you and I hope you understand." He pushed his plate away, suddenly losing his appetite, stood up and said to Sally, "I've lost my appetite," he said to her as he walked away. "You're all set for him." "Ah, can't wait until tomorrow. I guess you'll tell Steven Martinez when you see him tonight." Brandon disappeared into the living room. The sound of the television filled the dining room, and Sally sat quietly at the dining room table, for the first time, burying her head in her hands, as she thought hard about her choice. She messaged Monica, "Can we meet early? I'm leaving in 5 minutes." Brandon heard the front door open and close. He took a sip of his beer and stared at the TV, realizing that he had been sitting there for 20 minutes and had no idea which channel he was watching. This was the first time he had ever taken a sleeping pill because he knew he wouldn't be able to fall asleep without the help of medication. As she waited, she observed the scene in the bar, people dancing the dance of seduction, which seemed to her more like the dance of despair and loneliness. Was this her destiny? Noticing the determined look on their faces, Lila sat down and fixed Sally with a stern look. "What the hell are you doing? Are you out of your mind? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and I thought you were one of the smartest people I've ever known. If you're really doing this, then you're the biggest idiot I've ever met." Sally said simply to her friend. "Good evening, Lila. I'm fine. How are you?" Sally said to Monica. "Your turn." Monica shook her head. "You know where I stand on this adventure of yours. I'd like to say more, but I'm afraid I wouldn't be as polite as Lila." But she left out words like liar, adulterer, idiot, and perhaps worst of all, disappointment. "But there is something I must tell you. I think you are about to make the biggest mistake of your life, but I love you and I'm here to help you no matter what you do." Sally hugged her friends warmly and expressed her gratitude. "Thank you all for your support. I know you probably won't condone my behavior, but know that it means a lot to me to have your support. Nonetheless, you all know that I don't do things by halves." Layla's voice was soft as she pleaded with Sally, "Cheating isn't natural. Committing to cheating is the opposite of actually committing." After a few moments of silence, Sally rose from her seat and said, "I have to go finish my errands for tomorrow and I have a bottle of wine on the way." After finishing her errands, Sally went to a dimly lit house to gather her thoughts. She sent a long text message to Monica. She knew her friend was angry, but she was willing to help open the trunk of her car. Sally realized that the cold night would ruin her purchases if she left her things in there. She decided to hide them in the downstairs hall closet. Returning to her bed next to Brandon, she tried to fall asleep. But that night Sally didn't fall asleep, and finally at 3 in the morning she decided to take a look at it, and after just 2 pages she closed the album and cried. She needed to make Brandon understand. At 5 in the morning she gave up on the idea of going to bed. And went to the guest bathroom and took a shower, then put on her Victoria's Secret lingerie and took out a nice dress from behind her back. Entering the kitchen, she quickly wrote a short note to Brandon, amusing herself with the idea of leaving him a "Dear Brandon." She placed the note on the coffee pot, turned off the light, and walked to the car, determined to complete her plan. He suddenly realized that she hadn't waited until tonight, and he pushed her into the arms of Steven Martinez. The image of her lying in Steven Martinez's bed hit him hard for the first time, and he wondered if he should allow her to spend the night with another man. to whom she had promised to belong only after that. As Brandon contemplated his situation, he realized that if she chose Steven Martinez, he would never love her again. He accepted that she put their child first, as any mother should, but he couldn't bear the thought of her putting another man ahead of him. Brandon hoped that she was still in the house. He checked all of the bedrooms, but there was no sign of her returning last night. Trace of her. In the kitchen he found a note on the coffee maker. He opened it with trembling hands and read the short message, "Please understand him." After making a pot of coffee, he went upstairs, took a shower, dressed quickly, grabbed a travel bag, packed some clothes and headed downstairs. The cold morning air greeted him as he walked down the stairs. He had forgotten to warm up the car, but he thought the cold might help wake him up and get him out of his blues. Opening the back door, he put his bag in and found the suitcase and Victoria's Secret bag on the back seat. He glanced at the passenger seat and saw that Sally was asleep. He gently closed the back door and paused, his hand hovering over the door handle. Tears of joy welled up in his eyes at the sight of his wife and lover. Brandon took a deep breath, opened the door and sat in the driver's seat. Sally opened her eyes and looked at him and whispered, "Good morning." Brandon wiped his eyes and replied, "Good morning. So I decided to wait for you in the car. I filled up the gas tank and grabbed a dozen crunchy cream donuts for us to eat on the way." Brandon opened the donut box and said, "There are only 7 donuts here." Sally then came to her senses and replied, "The dozen donuts are for both of us, and I've already eaten them." He asked Sally, "What do you think of country ham and butter cookies?" Sally shook her head. "I'm not dressed very well for a Virginia restaurant." Brandon looked puzzled. "There's no dress code at the Virginia diner. You can wear almost anything there." Sally grinned. "I know you can wear almost anything. I know you can wear almost anything, but you can't wear nothing." She opened her coat to reveal a set of purple underwear to show Brandon, who chuckled. "Well, is that a new winter coat?" Sally replied as she gently lifted his chin with her hand and met his gaze. "This suit and everything underneath it belongs only to you, from now until forever." After a short pause she continued, "I'm sorry for what I've put you through these past few months. You were right about almost everything. There were only 2 things you were wrong about. I didn't close my eyes to him, but I was afraid to look at you because I was ashamed of what I wanted to do. I'm embarrassed to admit that the shame I felt didn't stop me from planning to be with someone else." As Brandon drove past the Virginia diner on Route 460, he glanced at Sally, who had fallen asleep shortly after they hit the highway. Brandon's thoughts traveled back to that night 7 years ago, when he was attending his company's quarterly meeting in San Francisco, where he was the head of his division and his risky move had paid off big for his company. Seeing an opportunity at a time when foreign companies were snapping up U.S. competitors, Brandon pushed for the acquisition of an Italian company that had great engineers but was facing serious cash problems. The deal, ultimately worth billions of dollars, marked the pinnacle of the CEO's career and put Brandon on the fast track to company growth. Sally returns home to Virginia to attend a school band concert with her children. Brandon and Kelly developed a long and friendly business relationship. Brandon and Kelly establish a long and friendly business flirtation. Brandon and Emmy have enough of a relationship to let his guard down, but not enough to get under his skin. They danced close, closer than a married man could dance with someone other than his wife. He thought of his wife and the wonderful family waiting for him at home, and as beautiful as Kelly was, he couldn't find any reason to enter her room, and he took 2 steps back before running back to the elevator. 0 a.m. At his home in Richmond, Brandon was eager to hear Sally's voice despite the late hour, so he called her, and after a few moments Sally answered the phone sleepily, and Brandon reassured her, assuring her that everything was fine and not to worry. In that moment, Brandon realized that he had almost come to the wrong person. Sally's opinion and happiness meant everything to him. As Brandon drove towards the beach, he knew that he had to tell her that he needed her to understand why he could truly understand how she felt. He had been in her shoes before, which is why he could honestly say, "I understand." Steven didn't understand why he was there, as he had missed a few work deadlines and had recently gotten caught up in his pursuit of Sally. But he was sure he'd be able to catch up on his work soon. And this meeting had disrupted his plans for the morning, and he needed to talk to Sally about what had happened over the weekend. She'd publicly humiliated him in the lobby of the Jefferson Hotel, and even hotel security seemed hesitant to intervene. An uneasy feeling came over him when he recognized the man next to Ryan. Even though they had never met, Stephen had seen his picture countless times on Sally Baker's desk. It was Brandon Baker. His movements came to a screeching halt when he turned around, ready to go back to his seat, and caught sight of a picture on Ryan Martin's desk. A family portrait of Ryan with his 3 sons and a beaming wife. Now Stephen knew the last name of the woman who had lashed out at him, Lila Martin. Suddenly it all made sense. He understood why he was here. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please consider bookmarking and subscribing. If you haven't already done so, please share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.